some good news, and the good news is Alena Media TV would like to announce to our lovely viewers that we are expanding our programs soon. Kindly take note of our weekly activities. On Monday, we'll report on COVID-19 and editorials. Tuesdays are African history, and on Wednesday, world news and editorials. Thursdays are COVID-19 reports and African news, and on Friday is world history. Saturday is African news and editorials. Another good news is we are starting a satellite broadcast very soon. This satellite broadcast will begin on the 20th June 2020, which will also be Eritrean Martyrs Memorial Day. Kindly take note of our frequency. Now sat vertical 12728. Symbol rate 27500. FEC 5/6. Again, now sat vertical 12728. Symbol rate 27500. FEC 5/6. Now let's move to world history on World War One. World War One began in 1914 after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and lasted until 1918. During the conflicts, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire, the Central Powers, fought against Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan, and the United States, the Allied powers. Thanks to new military technologies and the horrors of trench warfare, World War One saw unprecedented levels of carnage and destruction. By the time the World War was over and the Allied powers claimed victory, more than 16 million people, soldiers, civilians, were dead. Tensions had become brewing throughout Europe, especially in the troubled Balkan region of Southeast Europe, for years before World War One actually broke out. A number of alliances involving European powers, the Ottoman Empire, Russia, and other parties had existed for years, but political instability in the Balkans, particularly Bosnia, Serbia, and Herzegovina, threatened to destroy this agreement. The spark that ignited World War One was struck in Sarajevo, Bosnia, where Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was shot to death along with his wife, Sophie, by the Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip on June 28, 1914. Princip and other nationalists were struggling to end Austro-Hungarian rule over Bosnia and Herzegovina. The assassination of Ferdinand set off a rapidly escalating chain of events. Austria-Hungary, like many countries around the world, blamed the Serbian government for the attack and hoped to use the incident as justification for settling the question of Serbian nationalism once and for all. Because mighty Russia supported Serbia, Austria-Hungary waited to declare war until its leaders received assurance from German leader Kaiser Wilhelm that Germany would support their cause. Austro-Hungarian leaders feared that a Russian intervention will involve Russia's ally, France, and possibly Great Britain as well. On July 5th, Kaiser Wilhelm secretly pledged his support, giving Austria-Hungary a so-called carte blanche, or blank check assurance of Germany's backing in the case of war. The dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary then sent an ultimatum to Serbia with such harsh terms as to make it almost impossible to accept. Convinced that Austria-Hungary was readying for war, the Serbian government ordered the Serbian army to mobilize and appeal to Russia for assistance. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declared war in Serbia, and the tenuous peace between Europe's great powers quickly collapsed. Within a week, Russia, Belgium, France, Great Britain, and Serbia had lined up against Austria-Hungary and Germany, and World War I began. According to an aggressive military strategy known as the Scaffold Plan, named for its mastermind, German Field Marshal Alfred von Schelfing, Germany began fighting World War I on two fronts, invading France through neutral Belgium in the west and confronting Russia in the east. On August 4th, 1914, German troops crossed the border into Belgium. In the First Battle of World War I, the Germans assaulted the heavily fortified city of Liege, using the most powerful weapons in their arsenal, enormous siege cannons, to capture the city by August 15th. The Germans left death and destruction in their wake as they advanced through Belgium towards France, shooting civilians and executing a Belgian priest they had accused of inciting civilian resistance. In the First Battle of the Main, fought from September 6th to 9th in 1914, French and British forces confronted the invading German army, which had by then penetrated deep into northeastern France within 30 miles of Paris. The Allied troops checked the German advance and mounted a successful counterattack, driving the Germans back to north of the Aisne River. The defeat meant the end of German plans for a quick victory in France. Both sides dug their trenches, and the Western Front was the setting for a hellish war of attrition that would last more than 3 years. Particularly long and costly battles in this campaign were fought at Verdun from February to December 1916, and the Battle of the Somme from July to November 1916. German and French troops suffered close to 1 million casualties in the Battle of Verdun alone. The bloodshed on the battlefields of the Western Front and the difficulties its soldiers had for years after the fighting had ended inspired such works of art as All Quiet on the Western Front by Eric Maria Remarque, and In Flanders Fields by Canadian Doctor Lieutenant Colonel John Mackay in the later poem. Mr. John writes from the perspective of the fallen soldiers, and it reads, "To you from failing hands we throw the touch by yours to hold in high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep though poppies grow in Flanders Fields." And this was published in 1915. The poem inspired the use of the poppy as a symbol of remembrance. Visual artists like Otto Dix of German and British painters Paul Nash and David Bomberg used their first-hand experience as soldiers in World War I to create their art, capturing the anguish of trench war and exploring the themes of technology, violence, and landscapes decimated by war. On the eastern front of World War I, Russian forces invaded the German-held regions of East Prussia and Poland, but were stopped short by German and Austrian forces at the Battle of Tannenberg in the late August 1914. Despite that victory, Russia's assault had forced Germany to move two corps from the Western Front to Eastern, contributing to the German loss in the Battle of the Main. Combined with the fierce Allied resistance in France, the ability of Russia's huge war machine to mobilize relatively quickly in the East ensured a longer, more gluing conflict instead of the quick victory Germany had hoped to win under the Scarflian Plan. From 1914 to 1916, Russia's army mounted several offensives in World War's Eastern Front but was unable to break through Germany's lines. Defeat on the battlefield, combined with economic instability and the scarcity of food and other essentials, led to maintaining discontent among the bulk of Russia's population, especially the poverty-stricken workers and peasants. This increased instability was directed towards the imperial regime of Nicholas II and his unpopular German-born wife Alexandra. Russia's simmering instability exploded in the Russian Revolution of 1917, spearheaded by Vladimir Lenin and the Bolsheviks, which ended Tsarist rule and brought a halt to Russian participation in World War One. Russia reached an armistice with the Central Powers in early December 1917, freeing German troops to face the remaining Allies on the Western Front. At the outbreak of fighting in 1914, the United States remained on the sidelines of World War One, adopting the policy of neutrality favored by President Woodrow Wilson, while continuing to engage in commerce and shipping with European countries on both sides of the conflict. Neutrality, however, was increasingly difficult to maintain in the face of Germany's unchecked submarine aggression against neutral ships, including those carrying passengers. In 1915, Germany declared the waters surrounding the British Isles to be a war zone, and German U-boats sank several commercial and passenger vehicles, including some U.S. ships. Widespread protest over the sinking by U-boats of the British ocean liner Lusitania traveling from New York to Liverpool, England, with hundreds of American passengers on board, in May 1915 helped turn the tide of African public opinion against Germany. In February 1917, Congress passed a 250 US dollars arms appropriations bill intended to make the United States ready for war. Germany sank four more US merchant ships the following month, and on April 2nd, Woodrow Wilson appeared before Congress and called for a declaration of war against Germany. With World War One having effectively settled into a stalemate in Europe, the Allies attempted to scoop a victory against the Ottoman Empire, which ended the conflict on the side of the Central Powers in late 1914. After a failed attack on the Dardanelles, the strait linking the Sea of Marmara with the Aegean Sea, Allied forces led by Britain launched a large-scale land invasion of the Gallipoli Peninsula in April 1915. The invasion also proved a dismal failure, and in January 1916, Allied forces staged a full retreat from the shores of the peninsula after suffering 250,000 casualties. Did you know the young Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the British Admiralty, resigned his command after the failed Gallipoli campaign in 1916, accepting a commission within an infantry battalion in France? British-led forces also combated the Ottoman Turks in Egypt and Mesopotamia, While in northern Italy, Austrian and Italian troops faced off in a series of 12 battles along the Isonzo River, located at the border between the two nations. The first Battle of Isonzo took place in the late spring of 1915, soon after Italy's entrance into the war on the Allied side. In the 12th Battle of the Isonzo, also known as the Battle of Caporetto, October 1917, German reinforcements helped Austria-Hungary win a decisive victory. After Caporetto, Italy's allies jumped in to offer increased assistance. British and French and later American troops arrived in the region, and the Allies began to take back the Italian front. In the years before World War One, the superiority of Britain's Royal Navy was unchallenged by many of other nations' fleets, but the Imperial German Navy had made substantial strides in closing the gap between the two naval powers. Germany's strength on the high seas was also aided by its lethal fleet of U-boat submarines. After the Battle of Dogger Bank in January 1915, in which the British mounted a surprise attack on German ships in the North Sea, the German Navy chose not to confront Britain's mighty Royal Navy in a major battle for more than a year, preferring to rest the bulk of its naval strategy on its U-boats. The biggest naval engagement of World War One, the Battle of Jutland, 1916 May, left British naval superiority on the North Sea intact, and Germany would make no further attempts to break an Allied naval blockade for the remainder of the war. World War One I was first major conflict to harness the power of planes, though not as impactful as the British Royal Navy of Germany's U-boats. The use of planes in World War One presaged their later pivotal role in military conflicts around the globe. Despite the Turkish victory at Gallipoli, later defeats by invading forces and an Arab revolt that combined to destroy the Ottoman economy and devastated its land, and the Turks signed a treaty with the Allies in the late 1917. The severe effects that chemical weapons such as mustard gas and phosgene had on soldiers and civilians during the World War One galvanized public and military attitudes against their continued use. The Geneva Convention Agreement, signed in 1925, restricted the use of chemical and biological agents in the warfare and remains in effect. We have learned a lot from the World War. People should take note of the disaster and how it has affected lives and broken lots of homes and families. We pray and hope that such wars don't repeat itself. Thanks for watching. Like and share, comment. Write down your comments below so that we can know our thoughts on these issues. Thank you.